I still remember the day I drove away from the place I'd called home. It was a brisk fall morning, and the scent of damp fallen leaves lingered in the air. I packed up everything that mattered to me into my beat-up old pickup, determined to leave the past behind. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was something I had to do. Betrayal had turned my life upside down, and the only way to move forward was to put distance between myself and those who had caused me so much pain. After hours on the road, I stumbled upon a quiet little town that felt like the perfect place for a fresh start. The folks there were warm, the pace of life was unhurried, and the town had a certain charm that drew me in. I found an old, neglected gas station and garage that had been for sale for quite some time. I could see the potential in it, so I made an offer which, to my surprise, was accepted. This run-down property became the foundation on which I would rebuild my life and my business. On a Saturday afternoon, I found myself sitting in a cozy corner of the local tavern, enjoying a rare moment of peace. That tavern quickly became my refuge. Not long after I arrived, I bought that gas station and garage at a steal. The previous owner was eager to offload it after it had sat unsold for 2 years. It was exactly what I needed, a chance to start anew and leave the past where it belonged. The first thing I did was construct a sizable retail store that faced the gas station. This was essential after the only grocery store in town began closing at 7 p.m. I relocated the fuel tanks so the pumps were easily visible from the store, which left plenty of room for parking. The store became busiest between 7 p.m. and midnight and was open 24/7. The garage, tucked behind the lot, operated from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., 5 days a week, with the occasional special project on Saturdays. Initially, the bar wasn't too thrilled when we started selling basic liquor, but it soon became a good source of income and brought some much-needed jobs to the area. The business took off after we restructured the store's layout, thanks to a savvy woman I hired. We paid off the equity loan in no time and had to double the staff to keep up with the demand, especially on Fridays and Saturdays. We sold loads of junk food to bar patrons and plenty of cold beer on Sundays, all at reasonable prices. That day, I was sipping on a double shot of whiskey, chasing it with ice water and a slice of lemon. I'd just finished replacing the steering column in an old truck that had been in a family for generations. It had taken me 8 months to find the right part and custom make some fixtures. The owner of that truck had no plans to ever let it go, and if he had his way, he'd be buried in it. Between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock was my favorite time at the bar. The regulars had already had their dinner, and in a couple of hours, the place would fill up with people looking to unwind after a long day. During my 6+ years here, I'd built a solid reputation and made some good friends. The locals looked out for each other and always kept me in the loop if something unusual was going on. Every Saturday, without fail, I'd come to the bar for a drink before heading home. It was my quiet time, a chance to clear my head. Then I saw them walk in, and I wished I hadn't. They ruined what had been a perfect day. The woman was the spitting image of my ex, her twin sister, in fact, and the young man with her was once my son. Seeing them brought back memories I had tried hard to bury. I realized then that when you live with evil, you can't always see it. The boy had grown up, and he now resembled his real father more than I cared to admit, proving once again that the truth always finds a way out. But why were they looking for me now? They chatted with the bartender, showed him a picture, and left. I was relieved that my scruffy hair, beard, and mustache, along with the weight I'd lost, made me hard to recognize. No one noticed when I quietly sent a message, telling a trusted friend to come as soon as possible. About half an hour later, the bartender, Tom, came over and sat down at my table. "What did they want, Tom?" I asked. "They were looking to pass on a message," Tom said. "They heard a rumor you were living around here and wanted to see if it was true. They mentioned someone named Maggie who's dying of cancer and wants to make peace. I played dumb, pretended I didn't know who you were. Who are they, and what do they want?" I lit a cigarette, ripping off the filter as I did. The woman is my ex-wife's twin sister. The young man is my ex's son, though she passed him off as mine for years. Based on what you saw, do you think they were telling the truth? Tom hesitated for a moment. They were partly honest, but there's something they're not saying. Something big. I nodded. My ex and her sister had always been masters of deceit, appearing sincere while stabbing me in the back. Tom went back to his work, and my thoughts drifted to nearly 7 years ago when I left, vowing never to return. They had laughed at me then, thinking I was just being dramatic. But they learned the hard way how serious I was, as they never heard from me directly again. They couldn't grasp how deeply they'd hurt me. They thought it was all just a joke, not realizing that a few weeks earlier, I'd found out our youngest wasn't mine, but my brother-in-law's. That revelation set me on the path that led to this very moment. A family member who had seen too much of Maggie and Tammy's treachery provided the proof I needed. She called them black widows, saying they were pure evil. A few days before I left, I found out about a new life insurance policy they'd taken out on me. It had a double indemnity clause paying out $4 million if I died in an accident. An older woman, wise beyond her years, warned me to leave. When I did, they had no clue my truck was already packed with everything I wanted from my 16-year marriage. I drove away without looking back and ended up 2 states away. I got Willa pregnant when she was just 16, and I was 18 at the time. My family pressured me into marrying her, and before long we had 2 more kids. They thought it was funny, telling everyone that I'd come back once I'd cooled off, that I just needed to find my sense of humor again. A few hours later, a sheriff's car pulled up in front of the house. Willa opened the door to greet the officer. "Are you Mrs. Willa Rhine?" he asked. When she confirmed, he handed her an envelope and said, "Ma'am, you've been served." Willa chuckled, thinking it was some kind of prank, but when she opened the envelope and saw what was inside, she realized I had filed for divorce without so much as a second thought. My attorney had listed out all our assets and debts, along with a DNA test that revealed her year-long affair. The divorce papers detailed everything, including receipts and photos from their little rendezvous at various hotels. And to add insult to injury, there was a letter stating I was suing her husband for child support, infidelity, and defamation. Their laughter stopped dead in its tracks. The joke was no longer on me. I had the last laugh. They always treated me like I was only good for making money. Everything I touched seemed to turn to gold, so Willa and the kids were spoiled, never wanting for anything. But Willa soon found out that I had sold 3 of our businesses, paid off all the debt, and even sold our 2 apartment buildings for a tidy profit. I canceled all the credit cards, took my name off the bank accounts, and signed over my share of the house to her. I took half of our assets in cash, cutting off our cash flow from $10,000 a month to nothing. Willa's sister learned the hard way that using me came with a cost. My attorney froze their assets before they could even get a hold of the subpoena, leaving them broke. After the divorce, my attorney called Willa in and reimbursed her for 1/4 of their losses. "Why would he do that?" she asked. My lawyer simply said, "For him, it was never about the money. It was about principle. He hopes this money will give you a chance to start over and maybe learn something from the experience." But Willa refused to finalize the divorce without speaking to me first, leaving us legally separated, but not divorced. I had no desire to talk to someone who had lied to me for years. She had to work for the first time in her life, quickly learning how fast money disappears without a steady income. I had my attorney forward all important mail to a rented FedEx mailbox, which was then sent to my work address each week. I knew Willa and her sister well enough to expect they would eventually try to get back at me. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. Their family didn't believe in letting things go, and my absence would only fuel their desire for revenge. The longer this dragged on, the worse their payback would be. Up until now, I thought I had managed to escape, but seeing Tammy today made me realize their game wasn't over yet. I finished my drink and left through the back door just in case they were watching the front. I crossed the empty lot behind the house and circled around to my pickup. As I was unlocking the door, a man approached me. "You're a hard man to find, Mr. Arthur Sethrasim," he said. No doubt, I replied. And who might you be? My name's Peter Edwards. Your oldest daughter, Connie, is my wife. Well, that could be either a blessing or a curse, I said, eyeing him carefully. If she's anything like her mother, I'm not sure which it is. So why are you here? I came looking for you, he said. There are some things that need to be settled. Yeah, like getting your mother-in-law to sign the divorce papers, I said. What divorce papers? Peter asked, clearly surprised. Follow me, I told him. We drove through town and then down a long driveway that led to a farmhouse. Inside my home office, I showed him the divorce documents and let him make copies. He didn't need to know that I didn't actually live there. I'd built the place for the grand dame, hoping she'd eventually leave her old home. Peter seemed like a decent guy, confident and educated, but I couldn't help but wonder if he was who he claimed to be or if he was just another pawn in Willa and Tammy's scheme. He used my Wi-Fi to download files onto his laptop. All the important records were stored there with a master copy in a safe deposit box. He was particularly interested in a copy of the sheriff's report that Willa had signed when she was served with the summons. He even managed to print out a damning letter from Willa's attorney to mine, acknowledging the agreed-upon property division, but refusing to finalize the divorce without a face-to-face meeting with me. As Peter worked, I watched him closely. I could tell he was learning things he hadn't expected. My paperwork contradicted what he had been led to believe. Do you think Connie knows? Peter asked. That's something you'll have to figure out, I replied. But here's a question for you. Is Willa really dying of cancer? Who told you that? Peter asked, looking surprised. Tammy and Seth mentioned it to the bartender earlier today, but I know Willa's fine. She's in a common-law marriage with her former lawyer and is expecting his second child, Peter said. She's the one who asked me to find you so she can start the divorce. She claims it's necessary so she can remarry. He called his wife, putting the phone on speaker so I could hear. Connie, did you know your mother lied about the divorce not being finalized? Peter asked. What are you talking about? Connie replied, confused. Mom told us Dad abandoned us and took everything before skipping town. If it wasn't for our stepfather, we wouldn't have survived, Connie said. I'm sending you the legal file, Peter said. Read it and get back to me as soon as you can. While they talked, I grabbed 2 bottles of beer, opened them, and set one in front of Peter. Why didn't you tell my daughter you found me? I asked. Connie and I have only been married for 2 years, and we just had a son 3 months ago, Peter replied. For now, I'm not telling anyone. I've found you, Peter said. Everyone believes I'm just investigating a case. He pulled out his badge, confirming that he was a police officer with the Paradise Police Department. I quickly checked the department's website on my laptop, and sure enough, his story checked out. It was an accident report from a few months back that led me to you, Peter explained. Connie had filed a missing person report after you vanished, which eventually made its way to the wanted list. The insurance company informed me of the ruling in your favor. So why didn't you tell Connie you found me? I asked again. After going through your file, it became clear there's more to this story, Peter said. I started wondering what happened to the $250,000 Willa was supposed to get, along with the deed to the house. Why is everyone lying about what really happened? Sounds like I've been fed lies too, I said as his phone rang. It's my wife, Peter said, putting the call on speaker. Please keep it down. Hi, honey, Connie said. Where did you get all this from? Is it true we've been lied to for years? Seth doesn't know his real background, and neither do I. My sister Karen is going to be shocked. Mom scolded her for standing up for Dad, and now they don't speak anymore. This story goes against everything we were told. Mom and Aunt Tammy gave Dad no choice. They've been manipulating his life for years. What's really troubling is that the divorce isn't finalized because Mom refuses to sign it. What's really going on? It's true, Peter replied. I got the information from your father's lawyer's widow. I had to go out of state to track her down. Her husband kept duplicates of all his records. From what I can see, your mom was served with divorce papers the very day your dad left. I jotted a note for Connie to talk to her great-aunt Josie if she was still around. Peter nodded in understanding. "Pete, it's crucial that we find my father now," Connie said. "He deserves to be free of Mom and her schemes, at least to finalize the divorce. What happened to the money she got? Why did she have to sell the house if it was already hers? The more I dig into this, the more suspicious it seems. And why did she plan to sue him for desertion as soon as she found him? Ask my sister to watch our son a bit longer, and you talk to Aunt Josie about what we've discovered. Maybe she'll open up." Peter agreed. "We have to keep this between us for now. It looks like there might be some serious fraud involved. Why has your mother been slandering your father for all these years? I'll need to talk to the district attorney. The $250,000 cash vanished once it reached your father's lawyer. Don't mention anything to your sister just yet. If the DA decides to investigate, it's better if no one else knows." I got up to grab us some food, giving Peter some privacy while he finished his call. When he was done, he turned to me. "Why do you want Connie to talk to Aunt Josie?" Peter asked. "Aunt Josie gathered all the information about Willa and George's affair," I explained. "She never married, but kept a close eye on the family, almost like a mother figure. Raising her daughter alone gave her a different perspective on things. She believed that Tammy and Willa conspired together, using both George and me for their own purposes. But their ultimate goal is still unclear." "If that's true, why?" Peter asked. "Aunt Josie's granddaughter Jode wants her to move in with her, but Josie insists on staying put until the truth comes out. Jode visits her with her 2 sons, but she leads a very reclusive life. Socializing with Willa and Tammy takes a toll on everyone. Those two have been using people for most of their lives. It wasn't until Josie gave me the evidence that I realized the full extent of it." "Do you want to ask me anything about your kids before I go?" Peter asked. "Not until I'm sure you are who you say you are," I replied, my voice firm. "This could be another one of their tricks. Look into the sudden death of my lawyer, because if she's planning to sue me, what makes her think she can win?" Peter's face paled as he realized what kind of people he had married into. We decided to trust each other enough to exchange numbers, and he promised to keep me informed. I walked him to the door, shook his hand, and said goodbye. After he left, I cleaned up, locked the apartment, and took the long way home, making sure I wasn't followed. It gave me time to think. My life had taken a turn for the better since I'd left the past behind. But did I really want to dredge it all up again? Knowing Willa and Tammy, I had to prepare for whatever was coming. They'd go to any lengths for money. As soon as I walked through the door, 2 little kids ran up and grabbed my legs. I scooped up my 3- and 4-year-olds, the apples of my eye. Just like their mother, they filled my life with joy. I felt blessed to have all 3 of them in my world. My wife Jode called out that dinner was almost ready, so I went to wash up. Over dinner, I told her about my day. Since closing the store, I couldn't have imagined my life turning out like this. When I left Paradise almost 7 years ago, I promised my grandmother Josie that I'd stay in touch, and I did, calling her every Sunday. About 1.5 years ago, she called me for help. Her granddaughter Jode needed to escape a bad marriage and find a safe place to start over. Jode was 10 years younger than me, with no kids, living on an army base out of state. I didn't know much about her, but I owed Josie and was more than willing to help. It took me a week to find and partially furnish a 2-bedroom apartment for her in a small town. A nearly impossible task without the help of a friend. When I arrived to pick up Jode, she had already quit her job, emptied her bank accounts, and packed her bags. Her husband was about to enlist in the Marines after his final 2 training sessions. I quietly showed up around 8 p.m. with a rented U-Haul. With the help of a few neighbors and friends, we packed up all the things she wanted and loaded them into the truck. We left her town within 4 hours, and I made sure not to mention where I was from to keep her safe. As we drove, Jode and I started to talk and get to know each other. Later that night, she received a call from her grandmother, and I couldn't help but grin when I overheard her say, "Grandma, Arthur picked me up. You could have warned me. He's like a wild mountain man who might actually look half decent if he cleaned up." The next day, Josie, Jod's grandma, contacted her lawyer to have all the legal paperwork sent to a secure P.O. box I set up. Jod warned me that her soon-to-be ex-husband might try to stir up trouble, so I took precautions. Jod then took over managing my store, quickly proving she had a knack for it. She reorganized the shop, prioritized customer service, and drew in new clients with her friendly demeanor. Her management skills helped set up a team that ran like clockwork. Josie eventually had to get a restraining order against Jod's ex-husband due to his constant harassment. He was kicked out of the military and returned to my old hometown thinking Jod would be there. To keep unwanted attention at bay, Jod started wearing a diamond ring, which helped her adjust to her new life. She handled the finances and bookkeeping, quickly becoming a trusted figure in town. Jod's honesty and warm personality made her easy to like, and her long black hair, often pulled back from her face, gave her a fresh look. When people asked about the ring, she'd playfully say, "You'll figure it out," which led to whispers that she was my future bride. On Saturdays, she began bringing me lunch, knowing I'd often skip meals while working, which had caused me to lose some weight. As we spent more time together, our relationship naturally deepened, and people began assuming we were a couple. Josie kept us updated on the latest from back home, and we grew curious when we learned that Jod's ex was getting friendly with Tammy. The day Jod's divorce was finalized, our relationship took a deeper turn. We celebrated with friends at the local bar, sharing our first kiss during a slow dance under dim lights. 6 months later, we decided to move in together. One evening, as the kids were splashing in the bath, I shaved off my scruffy beard and mustache, leaving just a bit of stubble. The kids watched in awe as I lathered up my face and theirs with the shaving brush set Jod had given me for Christmas. When Jod walked in and saw the kids with suds on their faces, she couldn't help but laugh. "Looks like Dad might actually look presentable with a clean face," Jod teased. "Should I cut his hair too?" The kids eagerly shouted, "Yes." I chuckled, saying, "I'll leave that to the barber on Monday." "Nope, I'll do it before you change your mind," Jod insisted. After drying off the kids and getting them ready for bed, they sat at the kitchen table wide-eyed as Jod trimmed my hair. When she was done, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. I told her she did an amazing job and she sent me off to shower while she cleaned up. During this, Josie called to say that Connie had just left. Jod believed her grandma was finally ready to face the family and set things right. Connie had discovered that my kids were supposed to receive $600 each per month from a fund I had set up, but they hadn't seen a dime. The next week, I couldn't escape the teasing about my new look. People joked with Jod, asking if she had to blackmail me into joining normal society. Jod laughed it off, saying I'd promised to clean up at least 3 times a week. Most people got the joke, but some didn't. It was eye-opening to see how folks acted when they thought they were better than someone else. Then, a local attorney informed me that I was being sued in civil court for child abandonment, desertion, and back child support. Jod and I couldn't help but laugh, thinking that any judgment would just lead to a debt collector trying to track me down. Even the mailman found the whole situation amusing. The DA and his team decided to hire an attorney to represent me, piecing together what had really happened. Peter estimated that Willa and Tammy had stolen over $48,000 from each of my children. They reopened the case into my former lawyer's sudden death, turning it into a criminal investigation. Jod's ex became a person of interest. If the allegations were true, Willa and Tammy could face serious prison time, and Willa's common-law husband, who was once a lawyer, could lose his license. The attorney they hired for me would be paid by the DA's office, and I needed to stay off the radar to help build a stronger case. We had a few weeks of peace before Josie called on a Sunday night, letting us know that paperwork would be filed the next day. She emailed me everything she had collected over the years, including notarized statements, recorded conversations, and the names of attorneys for a countersuit. A $2 million life insurance policy caught my eye, explaining some of the missing money. Jod discovered that it had been taken out just 6 months before I left, We spent half the night sending all this information to the DA, certain this was all a setup to drag me back into the mess. The next morning, Jod called the recommended attorneys, picked one, and sent them everything, along with a retainer as soon as Willa's team filed the lawsuit. I planned to take action before they even saw it coming. On Friday morning, Jod called to let me know that Josie was on her way with some visitors. They had left Thursday night and stayed at a hotel, which suggested that things were escalating quickly. Jode and I decided to close the store on Saturday and take a long weekend to spend with family. Peter was driving with Connie and their son, but all Connie knew was that they were visiting Jod. Around 7 p.m., a couple of SUVs, an Explorer and an Escape, pulled up in the driveway. 4 adults stepped out. Noticing my anxiety, Jod gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. My truck was tucked away in the garage, so no one knew I was there. "Who's that with Josie?" Jod asked. "That's Peter, his wife Connie, with their baby, and Karen, my second oldest," I replied. "Are you ready for this?" "As ready as he'll ever be," I answered, as Jode, holding our youngest, opened the front door. We all stepped out to greet our guests. Karen broke down in tears the moment she saw me. I passed our son to his great-grandmother and pulled Karen into a tight hug. Connie handed her son to Peter and joined us. Seeing my daughters all grown up and together again was a moment I'd never forget. "Good to see you again, Peter," I said, shaking his hand. After everyone was introduced, Jod served up a hearty meal. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, gravy, fresh rolls, green beans, and warm apple pie for dessert. Once the kids were settled down, we began discussing the situation. "First off, Arthur, is it okay if I call you Dad?" Peter asked. I nodded. "Then, Dad, the DA believes Jod's ex's car was involved in your lawyer's fatal accident. They're comparing paint samples from the car's current owner, and if there's a match, he'll be charged with manslaughter," Peter explained. "The fire that destroyed the office the same night is now considered arson, and your ex was spotted on a security camera in the background. Since Willa and her attorneys sealed the divorce documents, they think there's no proof of what happened. They've filed a lawsuit against you this week." Tears welled up in Jod's eyes as she looked at me. "I always thought you were being overly cautious when you moved me here, but now I see why. I didn't understand why you grilled my grandmother so much. But now I realize you needed to know who we were dealing with." "Willa and Tammy received your lawsuit on Thursday," Josie said. "They must have figured out that I was communicating with you. We were worried they'd start harassing me, so we rushed to get here." "Grandma, we've got your new place ready," Jod said. "Everything's set up, so you just need to bring your clothes." "I brought most of it in the car," Josie said. "Connie will ship the rest, including the antiques. I've given her power of attorney to sell the house and furniture. It's time to leave paradise behind." "I'll drive back with Peter and Connie and rent a truck to haul everything out," I said. "It's time to see if our suspicions are correct." "What suspicions?" Peter asked. "The lawsuit is a trap to lure me out," I said. "With $2 million in accidental death insurance on the line, it's clear that my former attorney's death was no accident." Peter, Connie, Karen, and Josie all went pale as they absorbed the truth. "They were planning your death, Dad," Connie said. "Did you know before you left town?" "I had a strong hunch, but even my lawyer didn't believe me," I replied with a broad grin. "He found out the hard way that I was right." Peter excused himself to make some urgent calls, leaving me time to catch up with my daughters and wife. Jode found some old photos of me from when we first met. Both of my daughters admitted they wouldn't have recognized me today. When Peter returned, the room grew quiet. "Willa will be taken into custody after the holiday," Peter said. "We can hold her for 48 hours before charging her with multiple counts of theft for stealing the annuities meant for her children. We'll slow down the process so she won't get a bond hearing right away." "Dad, if you can fly in on Wednesday, rent a U-Haul and visit some old places to get noticed. Just tell anyone who asks that you're here to pack Josie's belongings. That way, Willa will be forced to communicate from jail. The DA confirmed your suspicions were correct. We'll have police protection for you at Josie's house until everything is settled." "Peter, are you using my father as bait to draw out my cousins?" Jode asked. What assurance do I have that he won't end up in danger? I met Jod's gaze, and she saw the resolve in my eyes. You're going to do this no matter what I think, aren't you? She said, knowing me better than I knew myself. Jode, Arthur has always been like this, Josie said. That's why I asked him to rescue you from your ex. Arthur never asks anyone to do what he wouldn't do himself. He's determined to put an end to this mess once and for all. My only worry is that Arthur is walking straight into danger, Jode replied, a small smile on her face. If Arthur were a fighter, he'd be a world champion, Josie said. He's quick and clever, always a step ahead. Willa and Tammy have no idea what's coming. Ladies, don't worry, I said. I'll be under Peter's protection. If anything happens to me, remember, he'll have to answer to Connie, my daughter. Peter nodded solemnly, aware of the risks involved in my return to paradise. Later, while the women chatted, Peter and I discussed the plan. The DA suspects Jode's ex will make his move once he learns you're back in town. He'll be furious when he finds out you helped Jode escape from him, Peter said. Willa will be informed of your presence by a plant in the city jail early Thursday morning. If Jode's ex is caught in the act, he might spill everything to save his own skin. I asked Peter about Jode's ex. Given his military background, do you think he'll give us trouble? He's always taken responsibility when caught. He's a follower, not a leader, so I expect him to fold easily. Willa and Tammy keep him under their thumb because he's easily manipulated, Peter replied. As we drove into the City of Refuge, the sign read, Welcome to the City of Refuge, population 34, 848. The city council here had declared that federal laws didn't apply, turning it into a modern-day Wild West where justice was whatever the local authorities decided. Law-abiding citizens were often targeted, while those on the wrong side of the law were ignored, all to serve the interests of those in power who sought lower wages and cheap labor. It was a twisted version of progress, with the working class paying the price. Not much had changed in nearly 7 years, aside from the newly paved Main Street. Everything else looked just as I remembered. My first stop was my old favorite hangout, assuming it still existed. To my relief, Bob and Betty's Burger Bar was still around, looking much the same but with a fresh coat of paint. I pulled the U-Haul into the parking lot, got out, and headed for the main entrance. It was 11:15 a.m., just before the lunch rush. I was counting on being recognized. After all, I used to be a well-known businessman in this town. As I took a seat and picked up a menu, I noticed a few people glancing my way, their fingers tapping on their phones. A server brought over my coffee and creamer. "Are you ready to order?" she asked. "Is the Wednesday special of meatloaf, baked beans, and garlic mashed potatoes still available?" I asked. "How do you know about that?" she inquired, surprised. "It's only for regulars and we don't advertise it." "Tell Jack that Arthur wants brown gravy and fried onions with the meatloaf," I said. The waitress looked at me like I was crazy. I stood up and said, "Never mind, I'll tell him myself." I walked through the swinging doors into the kitchen, with the server following me, shouting my order. Jack, the son of the original owner, turned and looked at me with a smirk. "You dumbass," Jack said, laughing. "You're a few weeks early. Welcome back, old friend." "Susan, bring Arthur's coffee over here so we can catch up while he eats," Jack said. Jack had never changed the name of the place, and we had been friends most of our lives. We chatted until just before the lunch rush hit. He asked a staff member to call his wife over so we could discuss more serious matters. "Arthur, you should know that after you left, my wife cut ties with Willa and Tammy for good. She didn't like what they were saying or doing to you and the kids," Jack said. "Jack, a few things are about to happen," I explained. "Last night an arrest was supposed to go down. If things go as planned, it'll trigger a chain reaction, like knocking over a row of dominoes. Connie's husband Peter is involved, and that's why I came back early." Jack looked at me seriously. "He's a damn good cop and an honest man. He put 2 of our former city council members in jail last year for corruption. You'll have to tell me more later. Too many ears around here." Just then, we saw Sasha pull into the parking lot. She looked great, but I knew this reunion would be emotional. I stayed seated, knowing she'd recognize me as soon as she walked in. "Sasha, what happened?" Susan asked as Sasha spotted me. "It was important," Sasha said, her eyes locking onto mine. I stood up and turned to her. My little sister had always had a fiery temper, but now her older, meaner brother was home. I hugged her tightly, as if no time had passed. It took her a few minutes to calm down. Jack asked the kitchen staff to give us some privacy. "Do Mom and Dad know you're back?" Sasha asked. "No, and it's best to keep it that way for a few days," I replied. "Are you here because Willa was taken into custody last night?" my sister asked. "Yes, and it's going to get worse before it gets better," I said. "Once I settle in, I'll be under police protection. The police are reopening the investigation into my former lawyer's death, now suspecting it's connected to the arson attack on his office." Jack and Sasha's expressions showed their shock. The district attorney appointed 3 years ago had been trying to resolve several cold cases. "You're being used as bait to draw someone out," Jack said quietly. "If this works, the arson, the murders, and several other crimes will be solved in the next few days," I replied. "Willa's arrest and my sudden return have already disrupted their carefully planned conspiracy." "What's behind all this?" Jack asked. "A $2 million insurance policy with double indemnity on accidental death," I said. "They insured it on me." "Damn," my sister muttered as we walked out of the restaurant to my rental truck. We were chatting when we noticed Tammy pulling up beside us. "Where are you staying?" my sister whispered. "At the Grande Dame's house. I'll be moving her stuff to the new place," I said. She wanted to be far away from whatever's about to go down. "Why did Josie leave town?" Sasha asked. "She wants to be close to her granddaughter and our 2 boys," I answered with a smile. "Jode and I have been together for over 5 years. We have 2 sons, 3 and 4 years old now." My sister was visibly stunned. "How did you and Jode end up together?" "Josie and I stayed in touch the entire time," I explained. "When Jode needed help leaving a failed marriage, her grandmother called me. I moved her to my place. We believe her ex was behind my lawyer's death and the fire at his office." "Do Tammy and Willa know you're onto them?" Sasha asked. "No, but they'll find out soon enough when they start making their moves," I replied. As Tammy approached us, I remained calm. "Art, I need you to drop part of your lawsuit against us," Tammy said urgently. "The district attorney will charge Willa within 48 hours. "Unfortunately, my attorney says we can't do that," I replied. Willa filed a new divorce petition claiming desertion, abandonment of the child, and back child support. Until the court rules on her claims, everything has to stay as it is. "You can't say that!" Tammy exclaimed. "How will we bail her out with no assets? The court has frozen everything." "Maybe your father could help by putting up his house as collateral," I suggested. "After all, you're both his daughters." Tammy's face fell as she turned and walked away, clearly disappointed. "Willa and Tammy's father hasn't had anything to do with them since he found out the truth about Seth's parentage," Sasha said, a small smile playing on her lips. "He says they turned out just as bad as their mother." That brought a grin to my face. Finished with the conversation, I got into the U-Haul and headed toward Josie's house, stopping along the way to pick up packing supplies. 3 hours later, I backed the truck into Josie's driveway, using the large side mirrors to park close to the garage door. Once outside, I locked up the truck and approached the house. I noticed the curtains were drawn even though Josie had mentioned she left them open. That put me on alert. I texted Peter to see if his officers had been in the house. He confirmed that they had probably closed the curtains. Feeling more at ease, I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. "Mr. Rhine," an officer greeted me, extending a cell phone. "Peter Edwards wants to speak with you." "Hey, Peter," I said. "Looks like those who need to know are aware I'm back. Tammy cornered me at the burger place earlier. She asked me to lift the lien on her and Willa's assets, and I refused." "I heard," Peter replied. "We taped Willa and Tammy discussing their plans. Jode's ex, Brad, came up a lot. Willa instructed Tammy to inform him that you know where Jod is, hoping it would push him into action. Our hunch was right because Brad showed up not an hour later. Willa told him where you were staying. Our informant, who was arrested today, tipped her off that you were back to help move Josie. When Brad asked where I was staying, what did Willa say? I asked. She told him you were at Josie's granddaughter's house. A few minutes later, we saw the garage door open on the security feed, Peter said. Climbing into the van, I pulled out bundles of cardboard boxes and started packing up the house. At 6:30 p.m., the pizza I'd ordered from Papa John's arrived. When the delivery driver knocked, I answered the door. "Are you moving?" he asked. "No, just helping a friend," I replied. Around 11 p.m., Brad made his move. He used a tire iron to pick the front door lock and slipped inside. Seeing a light on in the kitchen, he quietly made his way there, pulling a 9mm pistol from under his shirt. He found me sitting at the kitchen table, casually drinking coffee. "Hey, Art," Brad said, a forced smile on his face. "Willa and Tammy say hi. I'm here to find out where Jod is so I can visit her." "Sorry, but I'd never tell the guy who offed my lawyer or the man who torched his office," I replied calmly. "But before you try to take me out, because we both know you will, how much were you promised from the insurance settlement?" "What makes you think I did it?" Brad asked, his voice wavering. "Because you seem like someone who's easy to manipulate into doing dirty work," I said, baiting him. "So, how much of the $4 million did they promise you?" $4 million. They told me it was only $750,000, Brad said, his face paling. I laughed. "Did you know Seth is actually the son of Tammy's first husband?" Brad's expression turned to shock. "George and I have been manipulated and used by both twins for years. My attorney working on my divorce sued George and Tammy for everything they had. That's why I knew Willa's lawsuit against me for desertion and back child support was a scam," I said. "The divorce was finalized and just needed her signature. She manipulated me into coming back, and that's when I put it all together. You're just another pawn they played. So ask yourself, what are their plans for you?" Brad looked defeated as he realized the truth. "I'm screwed either way," he muttered. "Manslaughter would get me life." "You could get 5 to 10 years for manslaughter, but premeditated murder is life," I said. "When I'm dead, they can claim you acted out of rage over Jode and didn't know what you were doing. Did they set you up to be a scapegoat? Most accidental death policies don't cover murder. If you were in my shoes, what would you do?" "I'd make a deal, turn state's evidence, and hope my cooperation is taken into account," Brad said, placing the gun on the table. "That way, I'd get revenge on those planning to take me out." "Call the police," I said calmly. "Brad, turn around." "They're standing right behind you," I added. Meanwhile, Connie was watching Peter on the phone, wondering what was going on. Peter had told her that her father was at Josie's house. A late-night call on his cell phone had woken them both up. As Peter talked, Connie put the kettle on to make hot chocolate. When Peter hung up the phone, he was smiling. "Your father surprised us all tonight," Peter said. "He talked Brad down and basically forced him to confess everything. The undercover cops recorded the whole thing." Connie froze in surprise. "How did my father do that?" "He told Brad some facts he didn't know, like the truth about Seth's parentage," Peter replied. Peter said, "I think your father convinced Brad that the insurance policy wouldn't pay out for a murder. That was what tipped the scales. Even I'm not sure if that's true. But it planted enough doubt in Brad's mind for him to opt for a lesser charge rather than face life without parole. Aunt Josie always said your dad was quick on his feet, but this really took everyone by surprise." "What does this mean for my mom and sister?" Connie asked. "If Brad agrees to testify against them in court, both Willa and Tammy will be charged with arson, manslaughter, and at least attempted murder of your father," Peter explained. Connie picked up her phone and called Jod to share the news. They quickly made a plan. Josie would watch the kids for a few days because Jod needed to fly out immediately. Connie would meet her at the airport once she had her arrival time. After the call, Connie explained everything to her sister. By then, Peter was already dressed and heading to the station to get Brad's signed statement before the night ended. I didn't wake up until 8 o'clock in the morning. The first thing I did was call Jack to get the front door fixed. He said he knew someone, and within half an hour they were there replacing the door, installing new trim, and putting in a fresh lock. The handyman was just finishing up when my daughter Connie drove up with Jode. Jod jumped out of the car and ran to me, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, I realized just how much she had been through. "Brad was taken into custody last night," I said, trying to reassure her. "He surrendered to the police to protect me. I was never in any real danger." "If that's the case, why didn't you call me?" Jode asked, her voice trembling. "Why did I have to hear about it from Connie?" "It was almost 2 o'clock in the morning when the police cleared out," I answered honestly. "I figured I'd call you today." I put my arm around my wife and pulled her close. "I promise I'll never put myself in that kind of danger again." As soon as the repairman finished, we locked the car, put her luggage away, and headed to my brother's restaurant for breakfast. There we were met by Karen, Sasha, and my parents. Jack's staff had to push 2 tables together so we could all sit as a group. Jod was warmly welcomed by everyone, and our breakfast, when it arrived, was delicious. Jack was so excited about everything that had happened that morning that we ate every bite. My parents were thrilled to learn that Jode and I had 2 sons named Carson and Hunter, after both my grandfathers. They eagerly looked through all the pictures of our children that Jode had saved on her phone. My daughters shared their own stories about reconnecting with me and Josie. We were still deep in conversation when Peter joined us, looking tired but relieved. "Willa and Tammy are in custody now," Peter said. "Brad has confessed to everything, including his initial plan to kill his father. He'll be charged with arson and manslaughter when he testifies in what we're calling the witch trials. Tammy and Willa are facing multiple counts of grand larceny, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. The district attorney is meeting with the divorce judge who handled your father's case to expedite the finalization of your divorce." "Peter, are you saying that Art and I can finally get married?" Jode asked, still processing everything. "The DA took the papers to the judge," Peter explained, "along with your dad's original divorce documents. He's hoping the judge will waive the requirement for Willa's signature and issue the divorce certificate immediately." "Jody," I said, looking into her eyes, "I think it's time I bought you a proper engagement ring and finally proposed." Everyone murmured in agreement, and tears welled up in Jod's eyes. She had always believed we would get married, but this news came as a surprise. Before we left the restaurant, my mom and dad made us promise to come over for dinner. Jode and I spent the afternoon packing until about 5:30, then headed to my parents' house. Over dinner, my parents had plenty of questions, and Jode shared how I had helped her escape a bad marriage thanks to her grandmother. She also talked about her first job and how it led to where we are now. We were still enjoying the evening when Peter and Connie arrived with my divorce certificate in hand. It felt good to know I was finally free. As the night went on, Jode proudly talked about our children and the life we had built together. My mom suggested we have a wedding before we both headed back home. That's when my father grabbed Peter's attention, motioning for him to follow into the den. Grabbing a fresh beer each, we followed him. "We couldn't get a word in with all the excitement," my father said. "When word got out that Tammy had been arrested, people started calling in with more information. Half of the DA's staff had to help us sort through it. Turns out what we knew was just scratching the surface of what Tammy and Willa were up to. Now it looks like the mayor might go down with them." "And what about Willa's common-law husband?" I asked, curious. "How involved was he in all of this?" "He'll probably be disbarred, but nothing links him directly to the worst of it," Peter said. "He'll likely be involved in raising their children." "Has anyone notified Aunt Josie?" Connie asked. "Oh, and by the way, Jod's dad wears a size 6 1/2 ring, in case you were wondering," she added with a smile. A few minutes later, Peter and I were on our way to the mall. Knowing Jod's taste, I picked out a beautiful 3-ring engagement set. When we returned, we were pleased to find that no one had even noticed we'd left. I was on the phone with Josie when Karen and her boyfriend arrived. The house was bustling with people, so we all moved into the living room. The men had to bring in extra chairs from the kitchen. Dad told Joe to sit in his chair, which immediately caught my mom's attention. She watched everything closely, sensing something was about to happen. The room fell silent as I walked over, knelt down, and asked my common-law wife to make it official and become my legal spouse. I completely caught her off guard, but she quickly said, "Of course!" The room erupted in cheers. The celebration continued, with my father raising his glass and saying, "I've got almost 7 years of drinking to catch up on with my son, and Jod and Art, your engagement is the perfect way to start." The night was filled with laughter and relief as the stress and worry of the past few days melted away. Peter ended up driving Jod and me back to Josie's place. On Friday, we went to City Hall to pick up our marriage license. Jod was thrilled to find out she could fit into Connie's wedding dress, and Jack gladly agreed to be my best man. Karen was overjoyed to become Jod's maid of honor. The DA even offered to officiate the ceremony. I had to buy a suit at Macy's. There was no way Jod was going to let me marry her in blue jeans. On Sunday afternoon, in my parents' backyard, surrounded by family, we exchanged vows. Everyone looked on with admiration. Even Willa and Tammy's father was there. After the ceremony, we told everyone we didn't want any gifts, but my former father-in-law handed me an envelope. "Arthur, this isn't a wedding gift," he said with a smile. "It's your early inheritance. The rest of my estate will go to your daughters." I slipped the envelope into my suit pocket and didn't think about it for the rest of the day. The entire ceremony was videotaped by everyone, and the footage was sent to Aunt Josie. Someone asked where we were planning to go for our honeymoon, and Jod responded, "After everything we've been through, once Grandma is settled in her new house, our honeymoon will be a week in Florida and a week in California, enjoying Disney with the kids, because without family, we wouldn't be where we are today." The next day, before heading home, I handed Jod an envelope. Inside was a bank promissory note for $100,000, along with a note that read, "Thank you for helping to set things right. I always suspected the twins had a hand in their mother's death. I'll take great satisfaction in watching them get what they deserve, and so will my granddaughters." Jod quietly slipped the envelope into her purse without saying a word. After hugging my daughters and parents, Jod and I climbed into the U-Haul and drove home, finally free of the past and ready to embrace our future.